Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Howdy folks, you're listening to the muted drawl of one Lucas White, senior writer, /editor, /titles change all the time for arbitrary reasons at primagames.com. You've heard from my partner in crime, Jesse Vitelli, several times by now, I'm sure, and you may have heard from me before talking about Void Terrarium. I'm back with another weird JRPG, a little less weird because Square Enix put it out, but weird enough that no one else on this show has talked about it yet, which is cool for me. Romancing SaGa 2. So, the Saga games are almost directly connected to Final Fantasy, like a sibling or a close relative. You can trace it back to Final Fantasy II, which a lot of people consider the worst of the bunch, mostly because there's a sort of friction between the game and the player, unlike most other traditional kind of easygoing JRPG games. So essentially, the creator, or the, I guess, combat designer of that game goes on to make his own series that really takes off in Japan, but kind of has a reputation for, again, being unkind to players. And I think looking at things like friction, things like difficulty, agency, these are aspects of video games that are very polarizing in some ways, especially when you look at bigger audiences versus niche audiences. Games like Mass Effect pretty much give you the keys to the castle in terms of like being in control over the game, over the story being told, over your progression, over how you build your character. There's not a lot for you to react to or adapt to. And then you see games like Dark Souls and roguelikes and whatnot, which seem like the opposite in some ways. There's certainly an uphill battle to be had just to get through those games compared to games like Mass Effect. But they still sort of present that tension as a hurdle, a burden for the player to get past, to overcome. It's like more of an antagonistic force than the enemies in the game themselves. But there aren't as many games that kind of look at that as like a fact of the matter, or an avenue to something positive. And I think that's what makes the Saga games really interesting, and really kind of outlines why this particular series, within the series, is called Romancing SaGa, because that tension in a game kind of mirrors real life. And by that I mean the Romancing SaGa games sort of are interested in looking at you not as like the center of attention or the hero, the presence that the events of the game revolve around. They look at you as an individual among a massive sea of other individuals who are all part of a world that just spins regardless of what you're doing. There's a couple different ways you can kind of approach that line of thinking, and I think the more common route is making it, again, oppressive and antagonistic force, the sort of Lovecraftian idea of the greater cosmos just crushing you with your inability to like understand your place next to it. That can be used in effective ways. I think Final Fantasy 15 does a really good job robbing the player of impact as like a driving force through the story. Of course, that game also is very divisive, so you kind of see a good example of what I'm talking about here. But Romancing SaGa, again, takes the more optimistic route. It's a romance. It's that sort of traditional literary idea of romance, of the innate sort of self-validation as a result of like discovery of experiences. You go out and you find something and it impacts you on some level you had no previous expectation for. And I think that's what these games do very well. But again, sometimes that can come off in the video game form as kind of antagonistic to the player in some ways, especially with decades of expectations built up on what a JRPG is. For example, you don't get experience points. You get into a fight, and if you win the fight, then maybe your characters come out of it with something new. Maybe you get a piece of equipment. Maybe one of your characters gets some stat bumps, like their strength goes up or their intellect goes up. Maybe during a fight, there's a breakthrough and your character learns a new skill or a spell or something. The only control you really have over that is what you give each character, and then having that character participate in the action. Everything else is down to that character's individual experience, which in video game terms, again, kind of spits out what feels like randomness. That's difficult, especially when you start applying it to the story. For example, I'm playing Romancing SaGa 1 right now, specifically the recent remaster for the Nintendo Switch. And as the first in sort of a trilogy, it's definitely the rough one. It's definitely the one that feels the most antagonistic to the player, and that's because, in a way, you're punished for being careful. The world progresses based on how many battles you've won. It doesn't tell you. And in some ways, it doesn't really impact you very much. In other ways, it impacts you very much because there are side quests that will open and close within ranges of what you call your event rank. So if you're stuck on a hard boss and you want to go and battle some, get your character stronger, not only will the enemies kind of get a little stronger too, but there's a good chance you locked yourself out of a story and you didn't even realize it. That's tough to wrap your head around as a player, and I understand that. And I myself was really intimidated by these games for a long time. But for whatever reason, I tried Romancing SaGa 2, again, a remaster on the Switch, and it clicked. And I think it's because the team behind the Saga series, and the director, Akitoshi Kawazu, who also directed Final Fantasy XII, for example, or it came in to sort of be the director after the first guy didn't quite stick around the whole time, to make a long story short. So he's been around Square Enix for a while. But his ideas of individual experiences sort of colliding in a greater world, for better and for worse, are pretty consistent. So what Romancing SaGa 2 does is it kind of throws everything at you without telling you about it. And it just kind of pushes you out in the world and tells you to just go out and see what happens. You start the game, you play as this king. The king's got his homies and his son, who specifically is kind of like a weak guy. He's just sort of like, father, I will follow you. The king is like, you're probably going to die, but okay. Turns out the king dies, of course, because you run into some really nasty, big bad kind of figures. But the king's got a certain divine power, he's got the special king sauce. When the king dies, through unjust means, his sort of vial of Michael Jordan's secret stuff gets passed on to the little weak kid, who suddenly has the king juice. And it sets off this chain of events that can go across multiple generations. Each time a new king shows up, all the powers and abilities and experience is passed on. That's definitely some kind of wackadoo metaphor we're not going to get into, but you get the idea. But the point is, you don't really have a main character. You're playing as a lineage, and you don't know this while you're playing, unless you listen to this podcast before you play the game or something. There is an end of the line. There is a big bad. There is an overarching story. And you can get to the end of the line without realizing it and have a bad time. But the game's not trying to do that to you in that oppressive, Dark Souls-y kind of way. It's just the fact of the matter. It's how this world works. It goes on without you. Even when you have special circumstances surrounding yourself, that doesn't mean the rest of the world isn't still going. And that doesn't mean the rest of the world can't happen to you on the way. My favorite part of the game is probably the perfect example of that. At one point you can just come across this bar out in the middle of nowhere. And there's a lady singing there, and it kind of seems like she's a notable person, but there's not really an obvious arrow pointing to this person or anything. She's just one of the only people there, and she's singing, and it's she's got a beautiful voice. This singer lady is amazing. But if you come back to the same location a few times, different times of the day, eventually you'll see her jump into the sea, and she doesn't have legs anymore. She's a mermaid. And there's really no rhyme or reason behind, like, wanting to stick around or entering this place multiple times. There's literally no reason to. I don't understand how, like, a normal human being finds this storyline without a guide. But here we are. So if you pursue this storyline, you get to know this person, you get to know her sort of Little Mermaid-esque struggles with her humanity versus her mermanity. And you can go down to the bottom of the ocean with her if you complete another task that gets you the ability to, like, breathe underwater temporarily. But you're still the king, you still have a world out there, you still have revenge to get on behalf of your ancestors, yada yada yada. But what if this rung on the particular ladder doesn't care about that, or finds a reason not to care, a reason that might perhaps be a super compelling, good at singing mermaid lady who he's inadvertently sort of developed a friendship with? Well, if you keep pursuing it, eventually you end up at an ending to the line that doesn't involve being killed by random monsters. It's just this guy loves this mermaid lady, and he's decided that all the drama upstairs doesn't matter anymore. He's going to go live under the sea with his mermaid wife. And that's it. Dude abdicates the throne, and boom, you're on the next part of the game. It's not like an ending, per se. Just a thing that can happen and kind of push you to the next protagonist, and the game just continues. There's full little moments like these, and there's times where it messes with you. Like, there's a side story where you're trying to help some people out in a different kingdom through some drama, and if you exit the building at the wrong time, then that story continues in a way that you might not have wanted it to. And that's just what happens. That's how life works. You can be going out and deciding you're going to do one thing, and then you kind of trip over something else and decide that's more interesting, and maybe that works out for you, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you have a friend and something happens that results in tension, and that person isn't your friend anymore. You never know what's going to happen, and that, I think, is what makes these games so cool. Because it's not just like, oh, well, you procedurally generated these two weapon choices, so now you gotta figure out your run, blah blah blah. It's like actual events and stories and people that you're just coming across and deciding not what your role is going to be, because you don't really get to choose, but deciding like how much you care and if you're going to chase it or not. And there's just no other games that really do that. So yeah, that's Romancing SaGa 2. If you're looking for something that's a little different, but still familiar, and maybe something like Breath of the Wild really got you interested in just figuring things out on your own, these games will be perfect for you. Or maybe you'll be like most people and just bounce right off of it, and that's fine too. Happy gaming.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not...
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans!
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
You will be mine. Aurora.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.